Hello cyberspace, my name is Garrett Mills and welcome to episode 10 in my PHP development tutorial series. In this episode we're going to take a look at getting started with object-oriented programming. Now it sounds a little daunting, but I promise we'll get through it and it's awesome. If you haven't, I recommend starting at the beginning of this series so you get all the foundation concepts built up to this point, because we're going to be building on an application that we've already created in the previous episodes. So you can do that by clicking the I in the top right hand corner of the video. But if you've done all that, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so we've got PHP Storm, or whatever IDE you're using, opened up to this application that we've been building on. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, just kind of for testing. So we're going to, in here, create a new PHP index.php file. And this is just where we're going to be experimenting with some different object-oriented concepts. But before we start actually writing code, it's important to understand what object-oriented programming is. So up to this point, for the most part, we've been writing what's known as procedural code. This is code that's executed line by line, instruction by instruction. So, for example, if we open up this run once, this is procedural code because the first thing it does is it runs this line, which sets allow run to false. Then it runs this line, which checks if allow run is true or false. Then it runs this line, then this line, then this line, then this line. It just goes line by line, executing the code one step at a time until it reaches the bottom. This is procedural code because it does it in a procedure, top to bottom, executing each line. Now, object-oriented programming is a little bit different than that because it allows us to create reusable objects, hence the name. Now, these objects often come in the form of classes, so we've seen some of this already. So, for example, this line in our run once file where we set the connection to a new PDO. Well, PDO is a class object, and that just means that it has certain functions and variables and settings that are specific to that class that can be used over and over again. And we've seen some of this in our composer setup too, where we initialize a new environment loader. This is just a class with predefined methods. Now, when I say method, I'm just referring to a function. And in object-oriented programming, a function within a class is known as a method. So if you hear me say method, just think function inside a class. So this loader class has a specific set of methods and variables that can be reused in this class. And so what this allows us to do is it allows us to define all the functions that a class would need, all of the variables that a class would need. It lets us define that one time, and then we can just reuse that class by doing what's called instantiating it, by creating a copy of that class in an instance. Then we have access to all those variables and methods. So for example, think of it like blueprints for a house. A class is just a blueprint for a house. And then every time they build a house, you're creating an instance of that blueprint, an instance of that class. And so each house contains all of the components of the blueprint, but it's specific to that house object. And so all of the houses that spring from that single set of blueprints, they're all similar, but they're individual objects, and we only had to write one set of blueprints. So we're going to go ahead and actually get started writing a little bit of code. So let's say you're trying to keep track of financial accounts and their balances. Well, one way we could do this if we were using procedural code would be to make a variable for each account. So account 1. And then we could, inside here, we could have the name of the account, Bob's account, the balance, and the ID. And then if we wanted to create additional accounts, we would just create variables for these accounts. And this will work. We've got variables for each of the accounts, and they've each got the name, the balance, the ID. And so we just create an identical array for each of these things. But if you've heard me talking throughout these tutorials, you know that redundancy in code is not a great thing. So there's a principle in programming, specifically programming in languages like PHP, which are fully object-oriented, and it's called DRY. And DRY stands for don't repeat yourself. You don't want to have to repeat the same basic lines of code over and over again. So if you notice, the three of these things look identical. They each have a name, a balance, an ID, and then some value assigned to that. And in procedural code, I've written that 3 different times. And so say I want to change what we call the name of the account. Say we want to call that the nickname. Well, now if I want to change that, I have to go to every account and change it by hand. And so it's just cumbersome and hard to maintain, and also it's not a very clean system. Now, moreover, let's say I wanted to write a function that could change the balance of the account. So say I write a function, update balance, and it takes an account variable and the new balance. So what we would be doing here is we just take the account and then the balance, and we set it equal to the new balance. And so say we wanted to update the balance of Jane's account. Well, what we have to do is set her account, account 3, and that's going to be the new account after we call update balance on her account with the new value. And while this will work, it's very messy to have to completely reassign variables and trust these functions not to break this entire array, because this whole system is contingent on the fact that this function actually returns a properly formatted account balance. And say we changed the balance of the name of the balance variable inside these, but I forgot to change it inside this function, then it would break the entire system because the balance wouldn't get updated. And so it's just a very messy, redundant system. But imagine we had a blueprint for what the account would look like, for what an account variable would look like. And instead of rewriting the same thing over and over again, we wrote it once and then just built a new instance of that blueprint every time we needed it. So we're going to do it down here so that we can have a direct comparison. So what we need to do is we need to define a new class, and that class is going to be the blueprint for our account. Now the way we do that is using the class keyword in PHP. So class, and then the name of your class, and it's convention in PHP to start a class name with a capital letter. So class account, then we have curly braces inside here. Now inside this account class, this is where we define all of the variables and methods for the account. So all of these account items have 3 variables. They have the name, the balance, and the ID. So say we want to have those same variables inside our account. Well, we're going to use a little bit of new syntax. This may look somewhat familiar. We're going to have the name variable, the balance variable, and the ID variable. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this word public means in just a minute. But suffice it to say for now, it just means that we're going to let this name variable be accessed from outside the account class. So it just means that we can access the name variable. So we've defined name, balance, and ID, and then we obviously need the update balance method. So in here we're going to have a public function. Again, that public keyword just meaning we can access it from outside the class. Function update balance. And then in here, instead of requiring the account, we just need the new balance. So inside this function, all we need to do is change this balance variable. So we're going to use a new little function, a new little variable that you may not have seen before. It's this. And all this means is that when we call this variable, we're just accessing the current account. So say we have an account variable created, so we've we've created Bob's account, okay? And I say in here this balance, all that's going to do is get the value of this balance, since balance belongs to the account object. So it's just a little bit of new syntax that you may not be familiar with, but don't get daunted, it's just the way we access it. Now this little arrow here, this is definitely something that's new if you haven't done object-oriented programming, and this is something that's kind of specific to PHP, but this dash and then a greater than symbol is how we access things within another object. So what this does is it looks at the object before it, so this is an instance of this account blueprint, and it's going to find the balance object that belongs to whatever's here. In this case, it's account. Now the thing to notice is we didn't need to put another $sign here because balance belongs to the account blueprint, this variable. So we don't need another $sign because it's already defined up here. So this object contains a variable balance. Now what do we need to do with that balance? Well, we just need to set it equal to the balance defined up here. And it's important to note that this and this are different. This balance without a $sign is defined up here and belongs to the account. This balance with a $sign is defined up here and is the argument to the function. So what this is going to do is it's going to set the balance variable which belongs to the account to the new balance. So a class by itself doesn't do anything. I can't just go account balance. That doesn't work because this is just a blueprint. It doesn't have anything yet. So what we have to build the house, so to speak. We have to create an instance of that blueprint. So say we want to create Bob's account. So account, so Bob equals, and then we're going to use that little bit of syntax that we've seen every now and then, the new keyword, so new account. And then these open and close parentheses you do need after the name of the class, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those mean in a second. But what this is going to do is it's going to create a new instance of this. It's going to actually build the house, and it's going to assign it to the variable Bob. So say we wanted to update the balance now. Well, we can call Bob, and then we're going to use that dash and then greater than sign operator, and then the name of whatever function. So update balance belongs to account, and Bob is an instance of account, so we can call update balance and then the new balance. So 250.55, say that. So what this does is this creates a new instance of the account under the variable Bob, then it calls the function update balance and sets the balance to 250.55. So now if we want to see the balance, we can just do a var dump of Bob balance. So let's go ahead and check this out. So I'm going to jump over to whatever web browser you're using. Go ahead and open up our tutorial page. And there you go. So we see this float just tells us what kind of variable it is. And then we see the balance for his account, 250.55. Now, his account, when we create this, name and ID haven't been set yet. So say we want to set the name, ID, and initial balance when we create the account. Well, that's what these little parentheses are for. So in here you put arguments that'll be passed to a special function, which we'll talk about. So say we want to set the name, balance, and ID of this account. So the name, Bob's account, the initial balance, 250.55, and the ID, 1555. So when we have arguments inside the parentheses after a new class has been initialized, what happens is those arguments are passed to a special function that exists in every class. This is called the constructor function. So to modify this, we're going to open public function and then the name of the construct function. So this is 2 underscores construct. Now inside this function, inside the arguments section, we put the name for each of these. So we're going to have the name, balance, and ID. So what happens is when we create a new instance of the account, it makes a copy of these blueprints and then it passes these variables to the construct function. So in here you call anything that needs to be done when you first create the account. So what we need to do is we need to set the name. So this name equals name. And then this balance equals balance. And then this ID equals ID. Whoops. So what this is going to do is when we create the new account, it's going to automatically set the name, balance, and ID based on what we pass it. So we don't need this update balance call here anymore. So say we want to just look at the class. So we can call var dump on Bob, jump back over here, refresh it, and then if we look, it's going to show us a new kind of thing. It's an object of type account. And then we see the name has been set to Bob's account, the balance has been set to 250.55, and the ID has been set to 155.55. And so this is a lot cleaner to maintain and a lot easier to use. So say I wanted to create an account for Joe and Jane now. Well, Joe is also a new account. And instead of Bob's account, we just call it Joe's account. And 555, 1556. And then we can do the same thing for Jane's account. And so you can see this is much easier to maintain than what we had up here, because the standard structure, the blueprint for an account, is defined in one spot. And so if I want to change the name of the name variable, I just have to change it inside this class. And so then every time we create a new account, instead of having to define the structure all over again every time, all we have to do is create a new instance of those blueprints. And so that allows for much more powerful programming. So another big fundamental object-oriented programming concept is what's called inheritance, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But as we get started, let's just say we want to create a new kind of account, and that is a fundraising account or a charity account. And this charity account is similar to a normal account, except it has an additional field. So let's call this the Red Cross's account. It has the same structure, but it has an additional field. That field is charity name. And say that we needed another special method to get the charity name. So we define the function get charity account, return account charity name. This is going to obviously suffer from the same problems as our normal accounts will. Obviously, if we want to change the name of any of these variables, it's going to have the same problems where we're going to have to change it in every account. If we need to change something about the update balance function, that's going to cause problems. If we need to change the get charity function, that's going to cause problems. And additionally, how do we differentiate? Like, if you pass a normal account to the charity function, it's going to throw an error because the normal account doesn't have the charity name, but only the charity account does. So how do you differentiate between that so that it doesn't accidentally get called? Well, let's start the same as before. We're going to define a new class for the charity account. Now this class, what we could do is we could just copy and paste the same structure and just copy and paste that into the charity account. And that would effectively give us the same structure, the same methods, and we could define our additional method, the get charity name method, inside here. But then again, we're seeing the same issues as we were up here, right? We're repeating ourselves. This update balance function is the same for both classes. And we don't really need to repeat this update balance function since they share the same structure. It's just a little different. So what we want to do is we want to make the charity account base that charity account off of the blueprint for the account and then modify it some. So this is like if you take the blueprint for a house, someone else adds to it. So say they add a garage onto that house. It still uses the same structure for the house, it just has an additional component. And so they don't have to redraw the entire house part. All they have to do is draw the garage. So all we need to do is tell PHP that the charity account uses the same structure as a normal account. And we do this with a new keyword. This keyword is extends. And extends just means that the charity account is going to inherit or use all of the attributes and methods inside this other account class. So we're going to give it the name of the parent account. So the account, the class that another class extends from, it inherits its methods from, this is called the parent class. Because if you think of it like a ladder, so maybe I can draw this out. If you think of it like a ladder, at the top there's the class, there's the object class. This is a built-in item in PHP. All classes extend object. Then account extends object. So account inherits all of the methods and variables inside the object class. And then the charity account class inherits all the methods and variables inside this account class and everything above it, so the object class. And if we had a fundraising charity account, that extended charity account, this would inherit everything from charity account and everything above it. So it would also inherit the methods and variables from account and from object. And so this current class that we are working on, so in this case charity account, this is called the child class, and this is called the parent class because the child class comes lower in the chain of inheritance than the parent class. So this class automatically has all of these variables and both of these functions. But there's one other thing that we want to do. We want to set the charity name when the class is initialized. So what we need to do is we need to redefine that construct function. So we're going to call public function construct. Now in PHP Storm you see it automatically generated some syntax for me. And we're going to talk about this. But first we need to add the additional variables. So this construct function takes the name, the balance, and the ID of the account, but it's also going to need to take an additional variable. That's going to be the charity name. So what we're going to do is the only thing that's different about these parameters that we need to do differently than what we would do in this function is set the charity name. So we need to define a variable for the charity, public charity. And then in the construct class, we're going to set the charity name to the charity argument that gets passed to this function. But then everything else, instead of calling these again and being redundant and setting the values like this, instead of doing that, what we're going to do is we're going to call the construct function on the parent. So we can just reuse the function that exists in the account class to set everything else. So we just do what's different here, and then everything else just gets called by this. Now, this looks a little different, this 2 colons instead of, say, something like this that we have been used to. And the difference between the two, we'll talk about a little bit more later, is that the dash and greater than sort of arrow operator is used for instances of a class. So you've actually assigned it to a variable. So the account class has been assigned to the variable Bob. And so we can access things on Bob by using this arrow operator. But the 2 colons operator is used to access things what's called statically. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a later episode. But basically what it means is you're accessing things in the class without creating an instance, without assigning it to a variable. That this keyword parent is just going to get the account class, the parent class to charity account, and it's going to call the construct method inside the account class. So it's going to call this method instead. So we don't have to rewrite all of these lines of code again down here because we've already defined it once. Don't repeat yourself. And then the only other difference in here is we need to define a new function to get the charity name. So public function get charity name, return this charity. So this charity account is going to also have the update balance method, and it's also going to have these three variables from the account class, but it's also going to have the charity attribute, the charity variable, and the get charity name method. So this charity account extends this. It contains all the blueprints for this, plus the additional objects we added into this charity account class. So we're going to go ahead and create an instance of this, just demonstrate it. So red cross equals new charity account, and then in here we need to pass it. So red crosses account, and then the initial balance, then the ID, and then the charity name. So that's going to create a new instance of charity account. And so we can demonstrate that it's actually calling the construct function, the construct method in the parent account by just testing it. So say we want to get the balance. So if it wasn't calling this, the initial balance wouldn't get set. But we can verify that it is by just checking. So say we hit refresh, and there we go. We have the balance of the charity account. And say we just want to look at the class. There we go. We have the charity account, and there we go. All of the attributes are set. And say we want to get the charity name. We call that. There we go. We have the charity name. Say we want to call the update balance function. Well, the charity account class still has this update balance function. It just got it from its parent class. So we can say update balance to $100. Say they went bankrupt. And we're going to call this up here. And then say we want to look at what the current balance is. And we're going to see that the balance got set to $100. There we go. So this is just a basic introduction to some object-oriented concepts and how you can use them to make your code more efficient and more powerful and repeat yourself less. So effectively, if you ignore the classes that we already created, the unique code, the code that was unique to just the actual variables that we created for the specific accounts, we only had 5 lines of code versus up here where we had 20-some lines of code just to create the same effects as we had down here. Alright guys, thanks for watching the 10th episode in my PHP development tutorial series. As usual, I'll be down in the comments if you need help with anything, or you want to showcase something you build, or if you just want to connect with me. You can also connect with me on Twitter, Google+, via email, on my blog. Links to do all that stuff are down in the description below. And be sure to get subscribed so that you don't miss the next video in this series. We're going to take a deeper look at some object-oriented constructs and stuff that we didn't quite get to today. And as always, thanks for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.